Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to CSIS. Very pleased to have all of you here today. My name is Sarah Ladislaw. I direct the Energy and National Security Program here, and we're very pleased to have you as part of our series on climate change and the national and corporate interest. Today, I'm really delighted to have with us somebody I've known for a while and really admired in this space, quite frankly. Bjørn Otto Sverdrup is the Senior Vice President for Sustainability at Statoil, where he also serves on the Management Committee on some of these issues in the Business Development Unit as well. Bjørn is going to talk to us a little bit about Statoil's climate roadmap. And he's fresh back from New York, where, as many of you know, New York Climate Week was going on. It was a really exciting and interesting look at what different political leaders and different companies and quite frankly, a lot of different members of civil society are doing to deal with climate change in the current environment today. And so we're very pleased to have Bjørn here to share with us how Statoil in particular is thinking about these issues and why they view it as core to their business, right? That's the purpose of this speaker series that we've put on. It's really exploring for different companies and different countries why the strategies that they've put in place to deal with climate change are part of what they see as sort of a long-term vision, and what are the costs and benefits associated with the actions that they've chosen to pursue. I just want to remind everybody today's conversation is on the record and it is being webcast, so when we get to the point where you can ask questions, if you can please speak into the mic so everybody can hear you. And if you are watching online, we will be taking questions via Twitter. You can use the CSIS Live hashtag if you like, or just copy the CSIS Energy program when you ask a question, and we'll make sure we incorporate those into the question and answer period. So. Without further ado, I'd like to bring Bjørn up to talk to us a little bit about the climate roadmap. Then we'll have a discussion and bring all of you into it. I have to say, and those of you who are regulars, you know this, we take your security very seriously here at CSIS. So by way of safety moment, if something happens, if an alarm goes off or there's a security incident, please myself or some of my other colleagues standing in the back from CSIS will be your sort of safety monitors and will help you evacuate the building. So we don't anticipate anything like that happening this morning, but we are obligated to tell you that. So without further ado, Bjørn, thanks very much.
Thank you. Sarah, and should I use this one or the other one? I'm fine anyway. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here with you, Sarah, at CSIS, and I'm thrilled to see so many of you here. It shows that many of you are interested in the fact that what do companies do when it comes to climate change. I always thought that being part of the energy industry is a very interesting thing, but I must say that it's never been more interesting than now. So if you're interested in shaping the future, you should be involved in shaping the future of energy. Let me say a few words about that. So the planet is warming. We see global warming. The reason for that is mainly there's increased CO2 in the atmosphere. And we know that 80% of that CO2 is from man-made, and most of it is coming from energy systems. And our energy systems are made out of fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. So in order to manage global warming, we need to probably change over time our energy systems. So we need to rebuild the infrastructures of the planet, actually, for the energy systems. So that's a very tremendous challenge, and one for great opportunities for energy companies. So for us, being an oil, gas, energy company, this offers, we're in the business of transition. Our industry will be changing, and we will see that there is a lot of opportunities for a company like us to be winners as part of that transition. So that's the main reason why we are working on climate-related issues. I have some slides here. Is it possible to pull them up?
They should be.
Well, here you go. So I'll just do this so for those of you who are not familiar with Statoil, we are originally a Norwegian-based company. We more than 40 years of history, but now we call ourselves an energy company. Every day we deliver energy to nearly 175 million people. It should have been 200 million because people should be using the stuff much more efficiently. We have activities in more than 33 countries. And over the last years, we also built a very sizable position in the US. Actually, we invested more than $30 billion in the US. Each year, annual investments of $2.5 billion. We have more than 1,000 employees in the US, and very excited about that business, both when it comes to gas, oil, and also increasingly renewables. So we're excited about that. We have actually updated our corporate strategy, saying there are 3 things really important for us. So always safe, high value, being profitable is important, and then also part of our really core aspect is low carbon. So we believe that is, if you're going to be fit for the future, these are the things that you need to take care of. Run safe operations, profitable operations, and also low carbon. That's probably the recipe for winners in the future. Now, I started giving a couple of perspectives on the macro outlook. So a friend of mine or a colleague of mine, the chief economist, he's traveling around the world with energy perspectives or scenarios. And actually has been here in this, maybe addressed some of you earlier. So we talk about, we find it very helpful to say, well, it's difficult to talk about the future, describe exactly how it will be, but maybe we can envision very different futures of the energy systems. Different futures are possible. So today the starting point is that the world is using oil. Hold on. To the left there shows that's 2014, but it hasn't changed much. So mainly our energy systems are used based on coal, oil, and natural gas. And then we have 3 different scenarios of how this will be trending. And the very small purple blip there on top is new renewables. So as of today, it's a very small part in the total energy mix. And then we have 3 different scenarios saying, if we're successful, and the middle there, the renewable one, is a successful 2-degree scenario. If we're going to keep, or 3.6 Fahrenheit, 2 degrees. So that's the mix we kind of need in order to get there for 2040. So it shows that we need to have a lot more renewables in the energy mix. But there will still be, and much less coal, but there will still be plenty of need for oil and gas. And the reason is probably it's going to be very hard to, even if you wanted to stop using oil and natural gas, the pie is simply too big, and it's very hard to transition out of it. So we are, in this scenario, we are emissioning 90% electric vehicles, for instance, in 2040. Today, Tesla is only producing 80,000 cars. So you need to have extreme growth in electric vehicles, extreme growth in solar, extreme growth in wind, in order to just to get that. Still, you would need a lot of oil and gas. So it's a big challenge. So we, as a company, we would like to be part of this transition, and we have developed a strategy, and that's actually built on 3 legs. But you know, we cannot only focus on the renewables. Since the hydrocarbons are going to be with us for quite a while, we need to make sure that we produce the right hydrocarbons and use that stuff as energy efficiently as possible. So this is our strategy. Now, wait, so before we do that, so this is my strategy, why do we change? So you have the Paris Accord, of course, setting out very clear ambitions to stick to reach a 2 degrees target. But there are also plenty of other things happening. So a lot of regulations coming, but perhaps even more importantly, you see amazing changes in technology. You see costs coming down on offshore wind. You see costs coming down in solar. Very excited to see that. But we also see cost and technology changing how we produce and consume other parts of energy. So you see oil and gas costs coming down. We see shale costs coming down. We see also the way we use energy. We can see and envision very radicalized shifts in energy consumption in buildings, big data changing how we consume energy. So technology and regulation is changing the energy markets. So our strategy to address that is one of those three legs. So let's make sure that we build the oil and gas fossil business that's fit for the future, so reduce our emissions. The second is to make sure that we significantly grow our renewables business, or new energy solutions as we call it. And thirdly, we decided to change how we run the company. And for the remainder of this presentation, I plan to spend a bit of time on, so what does it mean for a company like ours to really reduce our emissions? What does it mean to grow into new energy solutions? How can we change the company we're running? So cleaning up your business is important. So we have decided we have emissions of around 14.8 million tons each year, quite sizable. So we have decided now to set a plan for 2030 to reduce that with 3 million tons. If we're successful, that will be equivalent to removing in the size of 1.5 million cars from the roads. Very significant. And the source of our emissions are basically compressors and turbines we use to run oil and gas installations. So we're looking, can we do that more efficiently? Can we, instead of having 2 turbines, can we use only 1? Do we need that backup capacity? Could we run installations on renewable energy? Could we use either wind power to fuel power installations? Actually, and the biggest field that we're developing now will be completely run on hydropower, actually, powered from shore on hydropower. So kind of emissioning huge installations run on 0 emissions. Our starting point is fairly good. So I think the challenge for anyone is to make sure that you are able to keep up your economic activity with producing less CO2, emitting less CO2. That is the fundamental challenge. To the left there, you would see the chart saying that we are measuring this to say how much CO2 do you emit per barrel of energy unit that you produce. So we're proud to see that we are among probably the best in the world on that, about half the size of the world average. And we're very eager to even continue to improve that. So we set a target to say, when we're building a portfolio for the future, we said, when we're getting new oil and gas assets into our portfolio, we're making sure that we are able to run those as CO2 efficiently as possible. So what does that mean? So for instance, here you see a subsea development. Getting rid of the platform is a very energy efficient way in itself. It will reduce the energy need. On the portfolio side, we have decided to divest from oil sands and the more energy consuming assets, and only making sure that the assets that belong in the future for us are the ones that can offer high value and low carbon. So this is very important for us because it's really over time shaping our portfolio. And we use this now as a very important and integrated part of assets. So we don't only look at break-even costs, capital, but also climate footprint when we do investment decisions. So that's how we focus on ourselves. But you know, we are a big company. I think we have more than 1,000 suppliers in the US alone. We have tens of thousands of suppliers. So we work very closely with the value chain as well. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples on how we use our kind of attention to energy efficiency to drive improvement in other areas as well. So I put this a bit funny title on top of that, but how big can a Tesla be? So we have a lot of these supply vessels. So Statoil is the world's largest offshore oil and gas company. So we just recently procured 5 new of these ships. And I was glad to see that then we'll ask the suppliers to say, when you, in the tender documents, we'd like you to submit what would you cost if you went for a hybrid technology on your engine systems, battery packages to reduce the energy consumption on the ships. So the 5 contracts we awarded were all to ships that had this kind of imagine Prius ships then, like type of ships. When they're in the ports, instead of running those big diesel engines, shut us off, plug it into the power cord and run on renewables instead. We shifted the contract schemes, so the ship owners have really energy efficiency, fuel efficiency incentives. And we're also telling them, hey, you don't need to rush to sail out, slow down. Very much like when you're encouraged when you do your driving in the city. Don't speed max out from the green light. Take it easy. No need to wait and use more energy than needed. Those things have actually achieved a reduction already by 30% in this marine industry. And now, of course, we're thinking, how could we do something similar with the super tankers? We're having 95 of them sailing around, and could we nudge them to become more energy efficient as well? So ripple effects, attitudes, trying to be what we talk about, the kind of being a force for a greener transition, not only inside this company, but also the entire industry, and shaping the future of the industry. Okay, so that's how we work to reduce our own emissions, clean up, and I think I'm very proud to say that we have, actually a couple of years ago, we set a 2020 target. And yesterday, and we announced that today, yesterday we said that we could celebrate. We already achieved our 2020 target of reductions, 2.5 years ahead of time. And so now all eyes are on our 2030 target. And I'm quite excited that we're going to hit that target. Okay, so that's how we work to improve our oil and gas business. And now to our renewables business. So for a company like ours, in a period of transition, how do we make sure that we capture the long-term value of our company and see the opportunities we have in our traditional industry while we position ourselves for growth opportunities in renewables? So what we're doing now is to gradually we'll be shifting more and more of our capital towards new energy solutions. So we said we're going to spend 50 to 20% of our capital in renewables. We have a tremendous financial capacity. We invest annually around $10 billion. So 20% is a big sum of money each year. We're quite excited about offshore wind. That's plays to a lot of our competitive strengths. This year alone, we have done quite a lot of steps. We have become owner and operator of some Sheringham Shoal wind farm offshore UK. We are the Dudgeon field has put into production. Combined, these assets will deliver nearly electricity to 1 million households. But we also matured the portfolio and now have a portfolio that will, if we develop it in full, could deliver electricity to nearly 5 million households. We're particularly excited, since I'm in the US, about the award that we won offshore New York a couple of months back to develop offshore wind. This is a pioneering industry in the US. Large-scale offshore wind turbines offshore New York that could help meet that city's 50% dream, or dream of 50% renewables. And actually, this project alone holds the capacity to deliver a very significant portion of that ambition. It's going to be a big development. So size doesn't matter, they say, or at times, but when it comes to offshore wind, it does. So this picture we took a couple of weeks back. It's the installation of some of the offshore turbines we're doing. This is the floating ones. So we engineered and developed a concept for developing floating offshore wind. So I'm going to point to this. So the marine structure, the yellow there, that's around 80 meters long, or some 90 yards. The tower is even more height. The rotor blade is nearly 100 yards, so the diameter is like a football field. They are huge, so it's like the size of the Eiffel Tower. These structures, gigantic structures. We towed them over to Scotland, so they're going to be the first floating wind park to be put in production in 2 months from now. So we're very excited about that. Amazing engineering, ability to calculate and manage ocean currents, wave currents, and wind. And the reason why we're interested in this is, of course, a lot of countries don't have a continental shelf where you could put offshore wind turbines on the ground. So you need to have energy solutions for deeper waters. And this is not in my backyard, further out, and with a very big capacity. So these are 8 megawatt turbines, and now we can say, could we do 10 or even more so? Some other things that we're working on is we're also working with the geothermal energy, drilling very deep wells. We just completed the world's deepest well in Iceland. It's a bit more future-oriented. It's a longer-term perspective, but we believe that's promising. But we've also been working with carbon capture and storage. And let me say a few words about that at the end. So carbon capture and storage, we have been doing that for 20 years. So could we capture the carbon and store it somewhere to take it out of the atmosphere? And actually, we've been doing that for more than 20 years, taking it at some of our oil and gas fields, capturing the CO2, and depositing it safely in geological layers deep underneath. We have monitored that very closely with seabed seismic down in the reservoir. I think we understand the technology very well, that it works. We have been capturing 20 million tons over the last years, quite significant. And this is a technology probably the world will be needing in order to get to some kind of zero emissions at some point of time. Now we're excited about seeing some new opportunities there. So we're working with the Norwegian government, actually. We're grateful for the support from them on having a new type of projects where we will be capturing CO2 from 3 industrial facilities, a fertilizer plant, waste management facility, plus a cement factory, industrial CO2, capturing it, putting it on a boat, shipping it to where we have a safe geological layer, and then depositing it. So this value chain could perhaps capture some 1.5 million tons. But it also will open up new opportunities because we see that maybe we can, in the longer term, produce hydrogen based on natural gas, take the CO2 out, and then deliver, emission-free, very energy-rich services that could be used in machineries or steel plants or using existing infrastructure. So last summer, we started a study together with a Dutch company to see whether we can replace a gas turbine, one of the biggest gas-fired power plants in the Netherlands, to, instead of running it on natural gas, running it on hydrogen with giving zero emissions. So a lot of exciting things, a lot of really different opportunities, but we know we don't have all the answers. So we are also shifting the way we do our R&D activities now. And we said, if we're going to be successful in both reducing our emissions and growing and discovering all those new opportunities in the new energy solution space, we need to shift the investment. So we're allocating around 25% of our R&D investments now already towards new energy solutions. Now, so these are the things that we've been talking about. This is the climate roadmap. We spent a full year developing that. So what are we as a company willing to do, able to do in being pointing to both the energy transition, but also accelerating how to become competitive in this space. So it's about cleaning up and running a very fit for future oil and gas portfolio. And then it's growing into the new energy solution space. But maybe even the most important thing is on changing how we run the company. Changing that, you know, we monitor CO2 emissions as closely as we do with the way cost and income. We take this into all our investment decisions. We train and educate our leaders and our staff on it, on how to understand and how to improve on this, and also how we kind of reach outside ourselves to collaborate with partners and others to find solutions needed for the future. So, yeah, let me stop there and say thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much for that. I think it was great, because I think for even those folks who are familiar with Statoil's plans in the past on some of your climate ambitions, you had some really great updates about how you've advanced that over the last several years, and so I think that was really helpful to hear. I'm going to ask you kind of a first couple questions about your plans in particular. I think you talked, and I learned quite a bit about how, as a company, you're driving efficiency in your operations. And I think that that's actually quite interesting. I think several years ago, folks thought, oh, okay, well, oil and gas companies can probably drive greater efficiency, carbon efficiency in their portfolio, but it's really going to be marginal, right? It won't be sort of deep. And I think what you're showing is that when you put pressure on your supply chains and you really sort of think about it as a cultural, corporate-wide enterprise, you actually can make quite deep emissions reductions.
Yeah, if you look at the world total, the oil and gas industry is a significant polluter, if you use that word, if you dare to use that word. It accounts for around 5% of emissions. But of course, we know that it's all of you and all of us when we travel around, drive the car, fly the airplane. That's where the real emissions happen. So, but still, I think polluter pay principle is very, very important. That was set in the Rio meetings on sustainable development. I think it's at the cornerstone of sound management. And for us, that means that we need to take accountability for our own emissions. And what we're seeing is that they are significant, and we can work that. Could you give me one example? So we nearly don't. We have eliminated flaring. We don't do flaring. Yeah. So that's very important. But at times we do some kind of safety flaring. Yes. And I talked to a guy on one of our installations and said, oh, they flared last night, and the 2 nights before they had to flare a bit. And they talked about this in feet, how much feet they were flaring, cubic feet. And then they said, nobody really cared. And then we said, since we pay a CO2 tax, I said, why don't we talk about this in the morning? I said, yes, yesterday we flared for this many $1,000. And it was like, oh. And then all of a sudden you kind of changed mindset and said, I flared for $1,000 last night. I need to change that. So the language we use, how we talk about it, is also a way of shifting attention. Yeah. So, yeah. That's a really great example. I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I think one of the really important points about companies becoming more responsive and proactive about climate change and reducing emissions is incorporating both the folks like you that do sustainability work into the business environment, right? And oftentimes I think a systemic problem in the industry has been that there's someone who does sustainability and then there's the people that do the business operations, and they kind of hang out sometimes, but they're not really sort of integrated into the same thing. One of the things I was curious about that's not really on this, but is a big part of a low carbon strategy for the oil and gas industry, is gas itself. Right, the role of natural gas in the future in lowering your overall carbon performance and carbon intensity of your portfolio. What I'm finding is interesting is for all of the oil and gas companies that are moving towards a gassier portfolio is you're actually going to have to be competitive in making gas a reality for the future. And that has both pros and cons. One, it's going to be a really competitive landscape for gas. And two, you've got to be able to answer the question, what does that gas bridge look like over the long term? How do you at Statoil think about the future of gas, both in terms of being competitive in that future, but then also
being able to deal with the sort of long-term future for natural gas.
Well, I think this is very important. So, and it's a very good observation to say that we don't say so much of the role of natural gas in this roadmap. In the US, of course, you have been very fortunate because you have been able to use more natural gas, drive out coal, and since the CO2 content of coal is twice as high as natural gas, you will effectively actually meet your Paris obligations or even Kyoto obligations by doing that. And in the UK, did you know that? The emissions are now at the level of Queen Victoria, the lowest in 120 years.
Wow.
And the reason is they've been able to get rid of coal and use more natural gas plus wind. So we have a lot of gas in our portfolio. And I think we see gas as a very important role to play to drive out coal, to still have a role in the power, but also it's a very good cousin or brother to renewables.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing and you need something else. And what we see is that natural gas is a very important enabler for renewables. So we are excited about the role of natural gas, even if you see that we're a bit concerned about the ability to earn a lot of money in it because there's such an abundance and people are not willing to pay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that is one of the things that people, I think especially in the US context, because we have a lot of gas, right? There's a lot of folks that say, oh, well, of course gas is going to invariably be the fuel of choice in the future. And I think when you look around the world, that's not actually the case. It is much more competitive environment for gas in terms of competing against coal in Asia or renewables in other different places. And to be able to have that sort of gas future that is lower carbon, even though it's not sort of deeply decarbonized, you know, in a post-2050 timeframe, you actually will have to be able to make those markets for gas in some ways. And so we're seeing a lot of that landscape shift for the oil and gas companies.
So, and I think from a climate perspective, of course, natural gas might not be kind of the solution in 2090.
Right.
But I don't think we can afford to not use the opportunities offered by natural gas to really slash emissions, and it's a very affordable way to doing it. So I think there's a big misunderstanding maybe in the public space, even that we can jump beyond natural gas very quickly.
Sure.
But because we still would need a lot of natural gas in the markets.
You mentioned one of the ways that people are often, and I promise I'll stop talking about gas after this, but that people often think about a long-term future for gas, which is CCS, which you guys are involved in the way that you talked about here, but also through the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative as well, which also is focused on another issue relating to gas, which is methane. Can you talk a little bit about how you're dealing through that, either through that organization or methane is a big issue here in the United States vis-a-vis natural gas production as well?
Okay, so natural gas is methane, right?
Yes. Oh,
so,
by the way.
so it is the product. But the thing is that if you leak off your methane, you have emissions to the atmosphere, and they work even more extremely than CO2. But they don't stay in the atmosphere for hundreds and hundreds of years, but they are very short-lived, or like 60 to 80 years. But with a multiplier of 20, 50, or it's different, but high multiplier to CO2. So in order to make sure that natural gas is much better than coal, we need to minimize CO2 and methane leakages. So we've been working a lot to understand the emissions and to minimize the emissions. So for our piped gas in Europe, we believe those numbers are 0.03%. 0.3% for the entire value chain, very, very low, so at comfortable levels. In the US, because the shale business, much more distributed networks, a lot of pipes, a lot of small sources. It's a bit difficult to calculate, but we also committed to work with others in the industry to really minimize that and bring it down to healthier levels, because there has been problems with tank batteries and what have you, what we've been doing is using military-style technology, FLIR technology, so you can put that around and use instead of because you cannot see it normally, but then when you point to it, it looks like a bit of a smokestack, and you can easily do part of modifications and fix that. And what we find is that we can do that as part of our regular modifications, and it's much cheaper than you believe to fix it. So also again, I think the industry can do this if you have the attitude to fix it, and we can do that. Give us a couple of years, and I think it's going to be fine.
Yeah, we had a conference here not too long ago with the International Energy Agency, and one of the things we talked about was the sort of the learning that's happening in this field in particular about what you can do to apply these new technologies and drive down the cost of actually finding and fixing methane leaks and where they're applying and at what point in the value chain or production chain they're happening. So I think you're right.
Could I just go on that?
Please,
so
go
since
ahead.
We're in the US, just say that we have also, this is the corporate thing.
Yeah.
But the way a company works is that, okay, then each business will say, so what's going to be your contribution to this?
Yeah,
so
right.
the key performance indicators trickling down. So ultimately each manager gets a kind of responsibility to make sure that the totality delivers. So then we'd say, so what would be the contribution from the US business to this?
Yeah.
So they develop their own roadmap. And methane is a very essential part because that's a big part of their problem.
Absolutely, sure.
And I'm very glad and actually a bit proud to say that we have just concluded that roadmap. And regardless of discussions about the recent changes to methane regulations, we have decided just we're going to move on and do this and beyond compliance regardless.
Well, that's great. That's great. So since you just brought up sort of the change in regulatory environment here in the U.S. and you have right down at the bottom of your strategy, the Paris Agreement is one of the driving reasons why you're doing this. I think a core part of this series that we're carrying on is what is driving you for this being a long-term strategy? And I guess how important is the continuity of the U.S. policy environment or the continuity of the Paris Agreement to your corporate strategy in doing these things?
Okay, so I think this is very important. So it's for us, this is a business strategy. So it's not a strategy of political correctness or a normative strategy in a way, even if there are some kind of ethical dimensions to it. But I mean, for us, it needs to be a business strategy. So we have organized actually our sustainability function now as part of the business strategy function. And when we developed this, I think we had more than 10 interactions with the corporate executive committee and the board on agreeing to this long term. And so saying, what kind of company would we like to be 10 years from now? What kind of company do we need to be in order to be successful? So looking at, what are the trends that we see? So that's what kind of informed this strategy. Yeah.
Well, great. So another part of your strategy is a carbon price, and you've had experience as a company with a carbon price in one way, shape, or form for a while, and you can talk a little bit about that if you want. But I'm very curious because it is typically, especially in a Washington context, but I also find when I travel around the world, folks either think of a carbon price as a magic wand, right? If we only had one, we would be able to do all of these things we wish we could do, or as a sort of an excuse not to do things, right? There is no carbon price and therefore we won't do these sorts of things. You travel around the world talking about this with other businesses and different government officials and things. How do you see the carbon price environment evolving, both as governments are seeing it and companies are seeing it, and how does that inform how you guys deal with that as an issue?
Very important subject. So should I first say a few words on how we meet carbon prices? Because if you value something, you kind of need to put a price on it, and then that will shift behavior. So we have been in a regime or subject to regulations saying that you need to put a price on CO2. There's a tax. Actually, you have to pay CO2 tax, and now that runs at around $50 per ton. And on top of that, since a lot of our activity is happening in Europe, there's also a quota cap and trade scheme, and you need to pay a quota on that's another, say, $7. So that's what we have to pay. So what does that mean? It means that when we do calculations of projects, it shows that, it's a high net present value. It pays off to invest in energy efficiency things. Or it pays off to not emitting CO2. So it shifts behavior. So it gives you a price signal to say there is a business case for being environmentally sound, right? Without the carbon price, probably we wouldn't have been among the most energy efficient producers today in the world. We probably wouldn't have done carbon capture and storage. So it really matters. So what we would like to see is that, this might sound strange, but they say, hey, tax us more. That's what we're saying. And even if we have a 78% tax in some countries already, we're saying tax us more. And it might sound weird, but I mean, that's why we are convinced that this is what we need to shift behavior. And now actually we're seeing that in more than 40 countries, you're seeing CO2, some kind of prices, cap and trade schemes developing. Canada is progressing a lot. California, you have it. In China, you're seeing it. And of course in Europe. So it is coming. But there won't be one price, global price. You will see differences in different markets. And I think that makes plenty of sense. So the Indians, of course, they cannot afford, they need to be on the level of cents or maybe to help tilt behavior in the right direction. In other countries, you can have $200 CO2 price.
Oh, that's interesting. So, because I think that's different from several years back when folks were saying, well, we would like to see sort of a similar price across the board. But in reality, you know, when people say, well, there's not a carbon price, there really are carbon prices embedded in policies. They're just not explicit, and it would be helpful in leveling the playing field for everybody to be able to see what they are and understand how they operate.
Yeah, and then, of course, Sarah, the reason why we believe in it is also, of course, we believe that the better companies will have an advantage.
Sure, right.
So, and we believe that we actually, this is an important part to measure performance of a company in the next decades.
Yeah.
Need to be good on sustainability and environment, and we believe we're good at it, and the ones who are not so good should be kind of penalized on it.
One of the things that you talk about in your roadmap, but didn't mention as much today, is climate risk and how you as a company think about and incorporate climate risk into your business. That was a big theme of the last year, not only in terms of the risk disclosure conversation, but just how you think about what are the climate risks to your company. Do you think about them more on sort of the regulatory side, the physical asset side, societal? Like, and do you think that's changed over the period of time that you've been doing this job?
I think it's changing. So taking a step back, 2 years ago, I think it was the Bank of England director, Mike Carney, gave a speech saying that for the financial sector, are we confronted with a potential big systemic risk? That if global warming is happening, we'll see change. Is there a systemic risk related to carbon? Either there is physical risks, regulatory risk, transitional risks. And what they wanted to do is use the G20 group to say, how should investors understand this risk? How should you be able to see that? And then it's been kind of labeled as what you can call kind of climate risk. And also we have been approached by and probably you've seen there's a lot of shareholder activism, shareholders saying, oh, what's your exposure to climate? What's your emissions? And you know, we have been disclosing our emissions for more than 10 years.
Sure.
We believe in transparency and also find it not so scary, but just helpful in many ways. So when some shareholders said, why don't you disclose your climate risk? Why don't you test the value of your company in a 2 degrees future? Will you be worth less, or what's going to happen in a low carbon world with Statoil? And instead of fighting that resolution, we said, well, yeah, good idea. And we embraced that, we welcomed it, and also spent quite a lot of time on trying to understand climate risks. So for 2 years, actually, we have been disclosing climate risks, probably one of the first companies in the world who have done that. And we learned a lot of doing that, and the amazing thing is, actually the first year, the value of the company, when we replaced their own kind of planning assumptions with the one of a very well-established low emission scenario, the value of the company showed we're going to be 5 percentage points less worth in a 2 degrees future. Not so much, actually, I thought. And when we did it this year, and then we had shifted a bit on the portfolio with sold out oil sands, that type of thing. And this year, say, the value of our company is going to be 6% higher than we believe ourselves. But it shows that we have a very fit for the future portfolio.
Sure.
We already put a big we use CO2 price already. We kind of penalize our CO2, and then we have a lot of flexibility in our. We're not locked into oil and gas assets. Actually, we have a lot of financial flexibility.
Other options.
So I think we welcome this. I think it's very important, but there are many other risks as well.
Yeah. So you just brought up the issue of the climate risk disclosure and environmental activism and shareholder activism, which I think is a really big issue for oil and gas companies in the climate change space right now. But one of the things that I think is a driver for a lot of that is the idea that oil and gas companies need to keep upping their game. Quite frankly, everybody in the energy industry vis-a-vis the climate challenge. But you guys have been doing this for a while and talking about it for a while. I think you are correct. What do you think oil and gas companies are going to need to do in the future, right? I mean, what do you think is the next thing that you're going to have to take on to be able to either check the box on some of the environmental community's concerns or your shareholders' concerns? What's the next sort of step?
Okay. So today I've been talking a lot about Statoil, but actually we're not the only one company doing this. And actually, we are very energized by also what some of the other companies are doing, both inside our industry, but also by others. There's a lot of dynamics happening, and really amazing things happening in other companies, including, I would say, Total, Shell, BP. We have joined this group of oil and gas climate initiative, 10 companies really embracing Paris and asking us, what can we do? Right. Can we do more? So we're excited to do that. But this is a journey, and this is. I'm not going to say this is a starting point because we've been going on for 10 years, but now this is our vision. But of course, we are asking ourselves, so what's next? What's even beyond this? Yeah. Because we know that the 2050, 2060, probably we need to have progress even much further the energy transition. And 2050, 2060 might sound like Star Trek, Star Wars for many people, but in Statoil we are investing with the 10 to 20 years perspective. Yeah. So we need to have that very long-term future thinking into our mind. So how do we? Will there be a market for this? Is it sensible to invest capital in this already now, that type of thing. But so climate is one concern. But if you're able to keep the costs down, keep capital flexibility, keep low carbon, I think there's going to be very great opportunities.
Yeah, well, and I think the excitement you claim to feel you said you feel for not only in your industry and other parts of the energy sector, we see almost every day here at CSIS in the energy program, we're looking at the way the energy system is transforming, and it's really quite remarkable. I think it's underappreciated how much the energy system itself is changing, and I think being excited about that competition is probably a good way.
Yeah, you need to be optimistic. I think because there are plenty of reasons to be pessimistic, but I mean, it will be the optimists who's going to change this. And coming down out of New York now with this climate week, there's so many, I must say, cool things happening on digitalization, really transforming. People are saying, "Give me the keys to your factory, and even if it's a brand new factory, I'm gonna cut your energy consumption by 40%, just by putting sensoring in." Yeah. So we're putting sensoring into some of our new machinery now, really, big data into everything to optimize it, remotely operated operations, amazing. And also on this, the cost journey on renewables that we're seeing into offshore wind, for instance, making them much bigger, much smarter, remotely operated operations, fine-tuning maximum to the millimeter on capturing the wind. Really amazing things.
Yeah. So speaking of amazing things, and then I'll open up to everybody else. I actually think the offshore wind farms are sort of, I think they really are amazing feats of engineering, and I'm not just trying to be complimentary. I remember, in full disclosure, back in the day when I worked at Statoil for a little while, it was sort of an idea rather than an executed sort of strategy. And I thought, oh, that sounds great, but God, that's hard. Like that, I mean, they're pretty complicated to keep still and optimize their energy input and output based on what they're trying to do. And I'll say, what I found very funny is we were hosting the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Energy Outlook here earlier this year. It was really great and insightful, and all the things they're usually obviously accused of or have the reputation of being very bullish on renewables. And the one area they said that they didn't get right and they underperformed it in their last outlook was offshore wind. Yep. And they had this slide that was basically like, we totally underestimated what this was going to be able to contribute and what the cost declines were. And we're really actually quite bullish on the future of it. I just wanted, if you guys have a vision for the future of offshore wind that you're thinking about both as a business opportunity for yourselves. Yeah. I just thought that
okay, so solar is really coming into the commercial space.
Absolutely.
Amazing. But you know, if you're a Norwegian at least, you would know that the sun isn't shining everywhere all the time. And then you have onshore wind, which is also now I would say in the commercial space, but this land is a limited resource. I think Mark Twain once said it's always a good idea to buy land because they stopped making it many years ago. And the scale of those are quite limited. So offshore, the wind is blowing much more stable, much stronger winds. You can have a scale, you know, the rotor blades, they're alone, they're like, I mentioned at 100 yards. You cannot transport that around on the roads. Right. So you need to have, these are huge structures. Huge, yeah. And so we can have a utilization of the capacity of around 50%. So we can look at scale here, which is fundamentally different from solar and onshore wind. So we're excited about that. We see this has mainly been a North Sea area, Denmark, UK, Germany. And in the US, even with your big coast, in its very infancy, I think you have one offshore park, and that's a very small one. But it's cool to see it. But now you have awarded some contracts and leases to start developing this industry, and we're glad that we're going to be part of the front runners of that, and it's going to be a very exciting journey. Probably you will have to develop your own industry related to this, and we would like to be part of that. So we see great outlooks, great opportunities for that, and I think it could be a very, very significant part of the renewable energy mix in the US.
Can I, one more question, and then I want to open it up to the audience so they can ask some questions, and our web audience as well. You know, climate change has a reputation, particularly in the United States, of being a very contentious issue. One where you think there's a solution, you think there's not a solution, you want to address it and talk about it, you don't want to address it and talk about it. Clearly, we here at the Energy Program feel fine talking about it as much as we want, and recognize that there are real difficulties, both from a policy and a technological and a whole bunch of perspectives about being able to make a low carbon transition. What do you think, in your experience dealing with this in the business community, is key to being able to try and talk about this on a more even playing field, where people don't feel like it's one way or the other?
Yeah. No, so we don't shy away from using the C word.
Yeah, the C word.
So on climate word. So actually, we just said we don't spend time on debating climate science. We let's act upon it. So, but beyond that, I think the changes is much more profound than. It's a deep transformation going on the energy systems regardless. As I talked about new technologies, solar, the competitive space. So you can see this as a political process, but mainly I think the dynamics now is in the technology, business dynamics side anyway. So and regulation for this or that is not really what matters. It's if you look at the longer term trends, that 5, 10, 20 years, this is the dynamics. So for us, we need to be open about the challenges and business challenges. But I would like to say, though, that even if we have a company focus, energy is also very much embedded into societies. So the change is not only going to be for companies, but also for communities and countries. So I believe that being open about some of the challenges, daring to talk openly about that, is a very important thing.
Yeah.
Don't shy away and having artificial debates.
Sure. No, I agree. Okay, we're going to open it up to all of you to ask your questions. If you could raise your hand, I'll call on you, and then please wait for the microphone. State your name and affiliation and question in the form of a question. That would be great. So we've got a lot of them, and I've already got one on Twitter, too. So why don't we take you two in the middle row here, or the middle aisle, and then I'll move up to you guys.
Hi, Jeff Epping with Energis LLC. Thanks, Bjorn, for the presentation. Statoil has a lot of experience with carbon pricing internally, but for the industry in general, given there's a wide spectrum of performers, based on your experience, what sort of carbon price would be needed to stimulate behavior but not be too expensive? You know, if it's $5 a ton, people will ignore it. You know, if it's very high, it's very expensive.
Do you have a particular behavior in mind?
Well, just for CO2 reductions, methane emission reductions, those sorts of things.
Okay, great, thank you. And then, yes, ma'am, we're gonna take them together, so we'll get them in.
Thank you. Hi, thanks so much for a great presentation. So my question is related to his, actually. And so you did touch upon external carbon regulations, and you said it does in some way influence your low carbon transition, even though the price may be low, if you were to argue. And internally, you have a shadow price of $50 per metric ton. Could you expand on that internal shadow price and how that is helping complement the external carbon regulations and the transition?
Good question. Okay, we'll take those two.
Okay, so two questions on carbon price. So the first one, maybe I should take the last one first, on how do we use carbon prices. So we use, as I said, in some geographies we actually have to pay a CO2 tax. It's real money, out of pocket. And that sums up to around $500 million each year in payment of taxes. Quite significant. So of course that make you run more energy efficient. That's the one that make these guys on the platform actually work really hard to eliminate that flaring completely, right? Or to sail that ship more efficiently. So that's both make us do the big decisions right by concept design, technology design, but also getting the cultural attitude right on everybody needs to do their part to gradually improve or do things a bit smarter. But in countries like in the US or Brazil or elsewhere, we don't have a CO2 price because you're not asking us, you don't tax us for that. And then we said we still believe, and this goes to your question about climate risk. We believe that in the future, somehow you will. So we better start preparing and build the resilience towards the future CO2 price. So that's when we use all in our investment decisions. We put oil price assumptions in there, we put gas price assumption, and we put a CO2 price assumption in. That's the $50, and it evolves over time. So making energy efficiency projects seem more attractive. They're kind of pushed up on the priority list. So that's how the mechanism works. So then to your question, what should be the right level? So we use a $50 CO2 tax, which is very high. I mean, by most comparison, because we believe that is right. If I were to advise government on what should be the price, I think, I don't think that's one number. You need to find the right price in different markets. In Europe, I would be looking at what is a meaningful price to make you shift from using coal to natural gas. and clearly $5 hasn't made you shift, so it needs to be more. In the US, I think you should be looking at some CO2 price to make you drive less cars or more energy efficient cars. Did you know that the US car used twice as much energy as the European one? I mean, not a brand, but I
That'd
mean...
be a pretty high carbon
the car
price,
part,
though.
yeah.
Okay, we're going to take some more. I'm going to add the one from Twitter in at the front end here, which is, you talk a lot about natural gas being the future. Let's see, hold on. Natural gas can be essential for when there are low winds, less sun. What about energy storage? Can you talk about the potential competition in the future coming from storage for natural gas? And then let me see the hands again. We'll go right there, and then you'll be the next round, and we'll get those three. So do you have Mike, Jesse? Right here. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Anton Hufnagel from the German embassy, and I want to ask a European question perhaps. You mentioned the Paris Agreement, you mentioned the 2-degree goal, and that your company's policies are basically supporting that ambition. But of course the Paris Agreement doesn't only have a 2-degree goal, because the 2-degree goal would mean that a lot of countries that we know to be in existence now wouldn't be there in 100 years from now. A lot of places would become completely unlivable, so there's also a 1.5-degree goal and that we strive to accomplish within the Paris Agreement. And I'm wondering what, for your company, you said you made a climate risk assessment in a 2-degree world, what that would look like in a 1.5-degree world. I mean, of course, your kind of scenarios for the share of natural gas, for oil, and so on in 2050, I think would look a lot different in a 1.5-degree world. Yep. So I'm wondering, is your business model taking a 1.5-degree world into account? And what would your spending on low carbon research, for example, need to be for 1.5-degree world? Because I think 25% is nowhere near adequate for that ambition that we have also set ourselves.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then we'll take this lady right here. Thanks.
Hello, Aileen Nowlin, Environmental Defense Funds, and I've had the fortune to collaborate with some of the Statoil R&D team in Texas. You mentioned how important methane is in the management of oil and gas in the future, and I'm wondering how you think about some of the fronts that you describe for carbon, such as training leaders, pricing internally, sort of a strategic focus on reducing that all across the board. How do you think of that on the methane front? And secondly, how are you thinking about working with partners such as the OGCI collaboration that you mentioned to share your insights for methane management across the industry?
Okay, so first on storage. Renewables, we are cheering on them, but there have some difficulties with them because they have this intermittency due to what do you do when the sun is not shining? And then also this when everybody gets home from work and plugs in their car maybe in the future, you will have peak loads. So how do you manage that? So that's why we would say energy system need to have redundancies, you need to have storage type of things. So we believe natural gas has a role to play. It's fossil fuels, I mean oil and natural gas are amazing energy intensive products with incredible storage facility. So it's easy. We talk about batteries, but did you know that even the best battery of the world, if you have 1 kilo of that and you have 1 kilo of gasoline, the kilo of gasoline would still keep more than 80 to 100 times more energy in there. So it's amazing products, oil and gas. So it's not easy to get rid of if that's what I'd like to do because of the CO2 emissions. So we will need storage. We believe a lot of progress in battery technology is needed, and not again big data to optimize storage, interplay in the systems and the grids. So plenty of things to be done, but we believe natural gas has an important role to play in this. 1.5 from Germany. Danke. So what would if you were to be successful 1.5 degrees, what kind of even more of a challenge would that be? And I think the short answer to that is that we really don't know that yet. The IPCC, the UN panel on climate, are working to understand that properly, and they're going to plan a report for next year. This is the first big, deep scientific work on the consensus work on what that would mean. So then we will learn more about that. But you know, headlines would probably be that you need to get rid of coal now or much quicker, including in Germany. I think you need to accelerate the exit of coal, and then you need to probably see we'll see a more rapid decline of oil, and then also natural gas. So everything quicker and faster and more dramatic and more. So yeah. But we'll see. And then for the sake of good order, so we use the scenarios that we were told by investors to use when we test. So that's a 50% probability of a 2-degree scenarios, which is the IEA scenario. If you use a 66% probability or change that, things looks a bit different. But I think as we learn more, what does with 1.5 degree look like, we could do better scenarios on that. Thanks for being here on EDF. We've been working with EDF. You helped us do some great work on, or you did great work for us on trying to understand methane emissions in Texas, as we talked about, and you're also involved now in the work on OGCI on methane in Europe. So that's, I guess, it's an example of the importance of partnerships across, you know, organizations, science, companies working together to try to understand this as best and find the best possible way. I'm not sure if I really understood your question, but was it about training and awareness type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, you've deployed some tactics within the company to manage carbon, such as, you know, the price.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm wondering if those sort of strategies, those management strategies, will be applied to the methane.
Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry I missed that in the beginning, but I think this is a very, very important point. So unless you understand that there is a problem with parts of the things that you're doing, it's easy to continue to do mistakes. So competence and awareness raising is very, very important. So in the same way as we've done with, we've actually taken more than 200 top leaders in Statoil and the kind of deep understanding of climate to understand that and really train them. And we have had thousands of employees doing climate awareness training, because we believe it's important that you need to understand this, how it affects your business. And on methane, we're also doing the same on, we need to talk about this. And for that type of group, you need to talk with the operators of the pipelines, because it's a lot, and the ones who are doing modifications and maintenance, because that's where the problem sits. So, and also in particular, the ones who are designing something called pneumatic valves and tank batteries and those kind of things, which we need to get right to manage methane in the US. So we have set targets on methane emissions and what is acceptance criteria. We're changing technical design requirements on how to design tank batteries, and we're embedding this into regular modification programs. So very systematic, actually, plus this cultural component.
Okay. We'll take one more round, and I might throw a question on top of there too. If we don't have
I'm
too
going to be
many.
shorter.
Okay, so we've got one there, one there, one there. You all, you're out? Okay. Or you have one too? Okay, we'll take 4 then.
Kurt Cobb, independent writer and consultant. Fossil fuel infrastructure is very long-lived, and if we're going to build a natural gas infrastructure that's going to be very large, what makes us think that we're going to want to give that infrastructure up in the coming years? Wouldn't it be better to focus on renewables now, which is an infrastructure that we won't want to give up in the coming years? Thank you.
Nope, we'll go right. William, why don't we go right here? Right in the front here.
Hi, I'm Lauren Kraft. I'm the editor of EI New Energy. I really appreciate your talk today. And one of the things that we like to cover, one of our favorite coverage areas, is oil demand and whether oil companies will have as much demand for their main product as they expect. So my question is, what kind of wild cards or risks or unknowns do you see in transport, which is the main source of oil demand? Things like electric cars, or even different ways that people get around different types of mobility.
Okay, so one on peak oil demand. We got Bill, and then you.
Hi, Bill Eichert, consultant. I was particularly interested in your 3 scenarios in the renewal scenario and how drastically different it appeared than the other ones. And I wondered if you could sort of unpack that a bit and tell us what assumptions you made in there, and also specifically what assumptions you made about sort of the large energy demand growth areas of the world, China, India, et cetera, and what policies are implied by that kind of scenario for those countries in particular, where the infrastructure, kind of related to this other question, might not exist for some of the current deployed technologies.
Channel your inner Eric awareness for that one.
Hi, Ponciano Manalo, IHS Market. I was just wondering if I see up there you have up to 25% of your research funds by 2020 will be devoted to new energy. And I was thinking, is that more kind of on the offshore wind side, improving efficiencies and the existing technologies you have, or is it the breakthrough, moonshot type experiments, the new cutting edge technologies that we might need in the future? Are you looking to split it in between those two, or are you focusing more on what Statoil is currently doing, just to kind of get a better sense of
is it the same as your venture fund, or is it, okay. So 4, sorry.
Yeah, that's 4. Okay, to your question, so should we just now spend the money on renewables because that's what we would like to have in the future? We believe we need to do both. The pace of speed of renewables, even if you're sharing and would like to make that happen very quickly, is not growing quick enough. We need to continue to invest in the oil and making sure that the oil and gas assets are as good as possible, but also actually, since there is a natural decline in oil and gas fields, we probably will not be able to meet the demand from existing fields. So we will still continue to need to do exploration and continue to develop that in order to meet future demand. And I'm just encouraged, if you're interested in this topic, read that Energy Perspective report. There's a lot of insights on the dynamics there, and also talking a bit about why is it so difficult to change some of these things, at least how we see that. So, on your point, slightly related on oil demand, when will it peak and what will it happen after peak, and what could be kind of main triggers in this? So on oil demand, we have said that, well, actually we believe that oil demand might peak in the 20s, not too far away from now. But then peaking is one thing, but it won't drop off overnight. And probably it's going to be a very long tail, and I think it's going to be very sticky, very hard to get rid of. And as we try to envision with these scenarios, even if you get 90% of all the cars that we're driving around are electric, we're still going to need a lot of oil and gas, because there are sectors that we see that they cannot go electric. It's shipping, aviation, heavy-duty vehicles. And then here there are leather seats maybe, but plastics, petrochemicals, clothing, pharmaceuticals, pens, what have you, computers. So we're actually very much surrounded by hydrocarbons. It is very difficult to get rid of all of it. So if there is one joker in this, I think there is the combination of technology, digitalization. Electric vehicles is fantastic, but maybe could we, when you're combining it with self-driving cars, that's when you really get a profound change in mobility. Those kind of things might might really change a bit things upside down. And biking. Electric bikes, that's incredible. I have an electric car and I have an electric bike, and actually I'm more fun of the electric bike.
You like the bike?
Yeah.
Even in Norway?
And you know, when I was in Beijing, this mission innovation, I was just surprised to see that in Beijing, they have now, you know, they have these free city bikes everywhere.
Yeah.
And they don't have places where you put them. They just leave them on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So there is like billions of bikes in the city around there.
Not
but more
advisable,
interesting is they have using electric bikes, and all these mopeds and small motorcycles are running on electricity. And very silent and very efficient. So I think actually that might, at least mobility in cities will have to change. And just spend 1 week in New York during Climate Week with Trump motorcades around. You see, you know, traffic is getting insane in cities.
You think there should be electric bikes?
Yeah, so I think you will see
Right.
big changes of patterns of mobility in cities.
Yeah.
And then that is important because over the next decades, nearly all, I think more than 60% of people on the planet will live in cities.
Yeah.
So that's very important.
We did have a conference here not too long ago that was looking at transportation trends, especially in large, developing, urbanizing countries. And you're right, the electric vehicles and bikes was a huge part of that trend. But also, I think people underappreciate the way that ride sharing is used in those contexts as well. Yeah.
You had a quick question on the assumptions, and I'm going to guide you to some of the technical things in the report. But what I think is, we called one of them rivalry, one of them renewal. And I think that headline in itself is important, because the way we see it is, if we're going to be successful to transition to a 2 degrees future, you need a lot of cooperation. A lot of cooperation among companies and mainly governments. You need a very harmonious world, harmonious political world, actually. So if you look at the things that characterize a rivalry scenario and a renewal scenario, successful transition, actually we're very much in a renewal type of world now, with the lack of trust in international institutions, a rollback from international frameworks, those kind of things. So yes, there are some numbers, assumptions on growth assumptions, but to me, it's this: do we believe in international solutions nowadays? Would we be part of the Paris Accord? Those kind of questions are more, even more important to watch. So of course we do some on what do you spend the R&D money on? So we spend we have more than 1,000 people working with research in our company, but we use 50% of the spending outside our company, because we like to get the impulses from the outside. With carbon capture and storage, offshore wind, solar storage, batteries, and then hydrogen, and then a couple of very cool things that I don't want to talk about.
to be announced at some point. Well, listen, you've been really generous with your time. I think it was really great to hear about how you're approaching this issue, not just now, but your experiences from the past and where you think this is going in the future. I hope you'll come back and do this again sometime with us again. So thanks very much for being here.
Thank you very much.